and welcome to the UC Big News Show. I am ecstatic to be joined by regular stalwarts including Jon Arnold, Mel Brue, Craig Durr, Evan Kirstel and Blair Pleasant, and of course I am your host, Kieran Devlin. I am also delighted to be joined by a new panellist, Derrick Kelly, AVI-SPL's Director of Solutions Enablement, Technology and Innovation. Welcome Derrick, and welcome to our regulars as well. Well then, shall we get stuck into some tasty news? And this is one that was raised by Jon. This is about the position of the SaaS market and UC tangentially, and the questions of whether it's in a good place in 2025. For a while now, there's this been lingering narrative. Has SaaS hit saturation? Try saying that after a few drinks. Some even call it the age of commoditization. But hold that thought, because recent quarterly earnings from the cloud giants are telling a very different story, one of resilience, reinvention, and renewed momentum. So is the market maturing or just getting smarter? Jon, what's your take? Does this signal the industry is actually in good health?
Sort of, maybe not with not screaming caps. No. But it's I do find it really interesting that over the last 2 or 3 weeks, including today, a lot of the big players have had their earnings reports, and it's very consistent that they're pretty much all showing kind of steady growth, not fantastic growth. So the market is definitely saturating. And those, double-digit quarterly growth numbers we used to see when UCaaS was scaling up and then CCaaS trailing behind it, I think we're past that now. But it is surprising to see that the numbers are kind of steady, single-digit growth for just about all the vendors I've been seeing or following reporting from. That's not to say that the vendor space is in a fantastic state of health. Just look at Mitel. You don't hear anything out of Avaya right now, of course. So not everybody is thriving, but and I'm sure everyone is here, is seeing similar things. But if you look across the board, in no particular order, like Zoom was today, Cisco, 8x8, NICE, Five9. There's probably a couple others in there I haven't caught yet. Ring. They've all in the last couple of weeks have had numbers out, and they're telling a similar story. And the positive news is that most of them are making money. NICE is making a lot of money, but most of the vendors are kind of like just a little above water there. And that's an improvement over a year ago in terms of where they were mostly a little bit underwater in terms of profitability. So those things are going in the right direction. But, all these vendors are still spending north of 40% of revenues on sales and marketing because it's so expensive to keep acquiring customers. And, they'll talk about churn being maybe 1-2%, but they got to be going somewhere because pretty much everybody is using these platforms at this point. Yes, there's a lot of debt in the market still, and that's a different conversation. But, there is this kind of slow and steady state there that, not everybody can be blowing the doors off. But, for example, Cisco had very good numbers, but, the collab business is maybe 7% of their overall revenues. So it's a little murky there. It's hard to tell. I think that business is probably flat, growing a bit at best. So I wouldn't get too excited. I mean, as long as the networking stuff keeps going, they can just keep collab in a quiet corner and just keep trudging on, and they'll be fine. As far as the big players go, I'm not commenting on that right now. I know we'll get to Microsoft layoffs, and I think a big harbinger of things to come, and I think we'll get to this in the next topic about AI kind of reality check. The news this week about Google going into AI-based search. I mean, this is really a seismic thing that could completely undermine the entire search business. And that's the heart and soul of what Google is all about. And, this is just a showing of how far and fast AI is permeating, the big guys. And if they can't control it, we don't have a lot of hope left, frankly, for, controlling the future of AI. So that's a good segue to where you guys are going to go next. But bottom line, I think to your point, Kieran, SaaS business, I think it's where it's at. There's another side conversation that Prem is alive and well in many sectors. That's a different topic. But where the SaaS business is established, it's not going away anytime soon. We'll see a year from now, AI might just wipe all of this off the board, but we're not there yet. So there's still money to be made. And I definitely got to put a cherry on the top for NICE. I mean, their numbers are so head and shoulders above everybody else. It's really, really impressive what they're doing. So enough of that, and I'll move on and let's go to AI.
Yeah, I'll add a counter narrative just to John's great comments on SaaS. I think SaaS has a big problem. When I talk to CIOs, one of their biggest topics is SaaS sprawl and cloud sprawl and overspending and too many vendors and consolidation and perpetual licenses. And it's fine for big tech. They have the muscle and the momentum to drive the SaaS business, but there are way too many SaaS applications. Customers, increasingly with low code, no code, and as John mentioned, Gen AI tools, are looking to build more themselves, not necessarily in UC, UCaaS, but in most applications. And that's going to be heavy headwinds for everyone but the biggest SaaS vendors. And I think the SaaS space is ripe for change and disruption, and I think there's a storm coming. I don't know what the others think. Whether our favorite mix of UC CC vendors will be hit by this to be determined, but people are tired of the perpetual license and the overspend on subscriptions. So my 2 cents.
So I just want to add something about John's point about profitability. Yes, the vendors are noting profitability because that's what Wall Street has been looking for. But most of them, with the exception of NICE, and John, also to your point, NICE is doing great, but they're not a UCaaS vendor. So we also have to, think about UCaaS versus CCaaS, because CCaaS is doing much better than UCaaS. But as far as profitability, I'd say most of these companies, again, with the exception of NICE, are doing big layoffs. And that's in part because they want to show profitability. So, we've seen that across the board, and I know we're going to talk about Microsoft, but so many other companies have announced big layoffs because they need to show that profitability. So yes, they're doing okay, but at what cost? So they're appeasing shareholders, but maybe not everybody.
I'll contribute one thing about that UC ecosystem, because we're talking about the anchor of platforms, and I still think there is debate, but acceptance of having Zoom and Team licenses, WebEx and Teams licenses. But having talked to some other vendors in this space, one of the areas that's getting hit, I see, is the ecosystem around that. Think of like endless canvas collaboration, murals, and things like that. I am hearing conversations of people cutting back on those perpetual licenses, favoring whiteboard applications that are native to Zoom, whiteboard applications that are native to Microsoft Teams as well too. So I think there's a tightening of the belt, as Evan was talking about. I've seen it and talked to people about it taking place on some of this ancillary business. And to Evan's point, I just don't know how much it's going to continue to shrink in towards some of those other overlapping licenses that were justified for business continuity, or I have to talk to customers and internally, or things like that.
Terrific. Well, should we move on to our next topic? And as telegraphed kindly by John, it is about AI, which has, of course, been the headline act in UC in collaboration for roughly 3 years now. But as we navigate 2025, the question arises, is AI living up to the hype or falling short? We've had recent showcases at Microsoft Build and Google I/O this week at the time of recording, where major advancements have been revealed around the likes of Copilot and Google's agents, and as John mentioned, Google's search in particular. Yet with all this innovation, some might argue that the transformative impact, the tangible impact on everyday collaboration remains elusive. So is AI and UC collaboration underhyped, overhyped, or just like the porridge in the nursery rhyme, is it just right? Blair, what is your perspective?
Okay, I'm going to be out of character and be a little more negative today than I usually am. But so let me start by saying, I know, shocking. So let me start by saying that I'm not anti-AI. I'm very pro-AI. I know it can and is doing amazing things, and it's going to be incredible. I've seen some, medical use cases where it's just, going to do some amazing things for the world. But my concern is that it's being so overhyped that companies are rushing out to deploy it without having proper strategies in place. And we're going to see a lot of really bad and even dangerous deployments in the coming months and years. And and we're partly to blame for the hype. Some of the market numbers I've seen from vendors and analysts is just nuts. 98% of contact centers are already using AI in some form. That I don't get that one at all. 80% of businesses are using generative AI. I don't know. That's still kind of high. One vendors or one firm said 90% of small businesses are using AI for everyday tasks. Most small businesses I know don't even know what AI is. So I think these numbers are just a little out of whack, and that's making people think, oh my God, I have to rush out and do this. So, yes, there are amazing use cases out there, and some of the productivity numbers are really impressive. And, we all, we on this call, of course, are all using AI, and it's very valuable. And I don't want to downplay its value. But when we talk about like going beyond, draft me an email or write me a blog, or what's a good recipe for paprikash, whatever. I want to see real business workflows and use cases and the way it changes the way businesses operate. So when I go to vendor customer conferences, I always talk to the customers. And aside from the customers that are highlighted on stage because they're doing great things, the ones who I talk to are in very, very early stages of deployment, maybe doing POCs, or they've rolled out AI to, a couple departments to try it out. But I haven't seen, these full-blown deployments. And most of them are trying to figure it out and figure out how they can best use AI. And recently, I surveyed some consultants and resellers about this topic, and I just want to read a few of their responses. So one said, when I talk to the vendors privately, they confess that AI adoption is way slower than they had hoped. And this is consistent with what I'm seeing from my clients. They're interested, but don't know how to start and are afraid of making mistakes. Another said there's more use of AI in larger companies, and the smaller players are not far along. They have less bandwidth for taking on AI projects and are more likely to use AI embedded in a vendor's product. Others say, my clients say they want to do AI, but don't know where to start and haven't done much. So, that's just a small sampling of, what I've been hearing. So, as I said, I know many companies are using AI, and of course, Copilot is awesome and can, be great for a lot of things. But the problem with the hype is that so many companies are going to feel like they're missing out if they're not deploying AI. But they don't know where to start. They're deploying it without having strategy, without having the proper guardrails, without having proper security. So there are going to be a lot of mistakes and a lot of issues. Even last week, I saw that my local government rolled out an AI chatbot for some legal questions, and the terms of use was hysterical. I posted this on LinkedIn and got a lot of comments. So it said something like, answers given by this chatbot or live agent may contain errors or may be incomplete. We make no representations or warranties about the virtual customer service, and we are not responsible for any damage, loss, claim, or liability arising out of the use of the virtual customer service center or information provided by the chatbot or in live chat. So, companies are basically covering their butts because they know that there's going to be mistakes and a lot of issues, and they don't want to be sued. So my point is, businesses shouldn't feel forced into rushing in or deploying AI because of the hype. So it's important to have a well thought out strategy and make sure it has the right guardrails and the right security, and don't just do it because your CEO says we have to do AI. So that's my rant for today.
I think, a lot of it is kind of dependent upon the types of companies that you're dealing with, types of customers, the scale and size of them, what they're looking at. Because we've had multiple successful rollouts where we have supported AI rollouts inside of very large organizations globally. And then we have others where they're just starting to ask questions. So it's kind of a wide gamut of where everybody is from a customer base side of things. There's also a lot of opportunity. And when there's a lot of opportunity, there's both a mix of good opportunity and then folks that are taking an opportunity to sell some things to people. And when they get into that space of selling things to folks before they're ready for it, they kind of unfortunately set certain parts of the industry back a little bit, because those stories get out there, because there's folks that are just using, an opportunity to sell something and make some money, as opposed to actually setting up a customer for an appropriate type of deployment. And that kind of makes it harder for, things to actually develop the appropriate way. It's kind of hit or miss at times, in how it develops. But we've had a couple of very, very successful UC AI deployments on very large organizations, but a lot of it went into appropriate planning phases, appropriate consultations, working through the process of, the right way. And then, actually delivering in a more of a phased approach in terms of how they were going to actually utilize it. You do have to do it the right way, but that's with any bit of technology, any rollout that you do in any way, shape, or form. You have to set it up appropriately, or else you will have poor results.
And that's exactly my point. So, yes, there's some great deployments, but they're well thought out, and it's not just rushed out to do it because of the hype. So I totally agree with what you said.
I think, Blair, you make a really good point, which is that people are saying, like, you have to use AI. So people are, instead of finding the problem and solving it, it's like they're taking a hammer and trying to find a nail. Like, find the nail that needs hammering rather than taking a hammer and just like looking for something to solve it with. So I think, there's a lot of hype around AI in general. And when you say like 90% of companies are saying they're using AI, that could just mean that they're using ChatGPT to ask a question every now and then, rather than actually using AI to solve real business problems. So I think we're kind of going through like this cycle of like, it's just sort of like the cyclical nature of hype, right? Like for the first is the overpromise and the underdelivery, right? Then you've got like this big investment bubble. Everybody's got to like invest a ton of money into this. And so now there's all of these expectations. And even the CEO Cadence recently said, like, this must end up being a multi-trillion-dollar market. Otherwise, all of these companies that have invested hundreds of billions of dollars will have done it for nothing. And so, I mean, I was just at ServiceNow Knowledge Conference, and there's that same message happening pretty much everywhere, which is this is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar business, and is going to bring, it's actually what the fear of taking away jobs is actually going to bring jobs into the market, just different jobs. And people who say that it's, AI is going to do people's jobs for them, I think are getting really ahead of themselves. There are certainly going to be jobs that are going to be replaced by AI, but there are a lot of jobs that will come about because of AI, because I think the hype around AI is undervaluing the versatility and adaptability of human skills. That's really the thing that, like, the hype is overestimating what machines can do compared to people. And even Jensen Huang said this recently. He said, like, if you're laying off people because of AI, that means you've run out of ideas. So I think, there's always everything that AI can do and knows is because it learned that from a person. So eventually it will run out of ideas if people don't continue to give it ideas. So yes, there is hype around it in terms of like the Me Too. I've got to do it. We've got to get going. There's also some positive aspects to that, if you look at like the Microsoft Work Trend Index, this has to come from somewhere. Like if you look at that frontier firm, there have to be people within the organization that are driving this change, and that has to come from the top. And there have to be champions at every level. So there's some positive aspect of this level of hype, but your point about like people just doing it because it is getting hyped, that AI washing, I mean, this was actually on LinkedIn. All of us know David Maldo. He posted something like, this AI has gotten out of control. It was like an iPhone screen that said AI optimized. Like, what? It's an iPhone protector. AI optimized? Like, that's when the hype has gotten out of control. So
I like your analogy. There's another firm out there that has the trough of despair, and I think that's where we are right now. We're at the trough of despair, but hold on. I want to be a ray of sunshine here. I want to elevate. I'm going to bring you. You're doing it. You're doing a great job. Of course, you are. You're always a ray of sunshine. But this is how I think about it, and I'm trying to put myself ahead of this 3-5 years. I think the most successful AI deployments or actions I see are what I call boring AI. It is things like in contact centers or call center environments. And I think the model that's taking place behind the scenes, and Derrick might be able to help validate this, it's an investment by enterprises. CEO says, we need to, what's our AI strategy? CTO says, I'll do it. CFO says, what's the return on that? And the ones that are finding success are the ones getting those boring AI use cases taken care of. I can measure time to resolution in a contact center environment. I can measure, other results. You have some companies like Zendesk that are actually now doing their licensing based upon outcome based, not just was it a successful transaction or not. So I think people are acknowledging this. But I do want to think of down the road, and I know people said this before, so I apologize, but it's going to become just an embedded, woven technology in what we do, as much as online access or SaaS-based models or things like that is done as well too. And I think there's going to be less pressure about it individually having a return on investment and more about bringing it forward. So I agree that right now we're in a trough of despair. Don't get me wrong. And there's a lot of hype because there's nothing about a piece of plastic iPhone protector that's AI optimized. But you might as well brand it, right? I'm sure on Alibaba or whatever it is, we have it. But put ourselves in the future. I think we are. There's a path. There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
So, you're right about that with the Bill McDermott calls it the soul crushing work. And I think that's where we're first going to solve a lot of problems is let's get rid of the soul crushing work so that humans can do the more valuable work.
Yeah. So basically, my point is, yes, do AI, but make sure you're doing it properly. You have the guardrails, you have the security, and you're not just rushing out there because, you don't want to be left out.
Slapping an AI label on it. iPhone protector.
I mean, adding on to Craig's statement, I think really where the long-term play of it's going to be is total customer experience, where everything's tied together, and utilizing AI to help tie all of that stuff together, from logistics to reporting to how it's utilized in UCC for translation and everything else like that. As all of the tools get better and get utilized, and as more investment is made because customers are utilizing them in various spaces, and there's ways to start tying different aspects together. And I know agentic AI is becoming the next step of hyped term, but that element of agentic AI mixed in with the boring stuff, how do we make sure that, from a contact center, engagement through AI, that we're not just getting it to a queue that somebody has to then take and, do manual work. It moves it through the entire process from beginning to end, utilizing it in the background where it's assisting human work and human-based work, versus this is the replacement for the humans in the work as a whole. If companies deploy it that way and start planning it that way, they'll see tremendous results to their business. They'll see tremendous results to how their customers view their company, because they'll see a lot of things, boring-wise, that are happening on time, exactly the way that it's supposed to, repeatably, and everything else like that, as opposed to leaving it up to kind of the, how it can go if it's a manual process that has to move from one person to the next person to the next person. You'll start seeing more repeatable results based upon boring AI usage in the background. And I think building that long term, I'm stealing that term, Craig, sorry, building that in the background and utilizing that incorporated with all the elements that AI can touch, can build a much better overall experience. And that's where you'll see the most results out of AI. versus trying to just find the most flashy new thing that came out that said it has AI or an AI enabled or whatever. That stuff is the stuff that will make people skeptical of AI as a whole. But then once people go through an experience where somebody's really optimized AI in the background and interconnected it across all different aspects of their business, they won't even realize they're using AI. They won't even realize that it's happening inside of the organization. And the organizations that understand that and implement that will have the best results out of what AI is going to be. Because even as things change, as technology changes, feature sets change, everything else like that, you'll start seeing a lot more use cases, that are not going to be flashy, but are going to produce tremendous business results.
Yeah, terrific. And I'm definitely going to steal the trough of despair for the next time my football team loses a match as well. We're moving on to the next topic, and it is relevant to the AI conversation, but maybe less sunny and rosy than Craig's counter-argument in defense of AI in the long term. There was the report recently that Microsoft laid off over 6,000 employees, about 3% of its global workforce. These cuts have impacted veteran engineers, middle managers, and even AI directors as the company iterates that it's doubling down on its AI-first strategy, with CEO Satya Nadella emphasizing that this is a strategic pivot to align with evolving technologies. There is, of course, the concerns about the human cost of rapid automation, and there's stories emerging that people are being let go by algorithms. I guess this is an important question, and is one we've touched on both this call and for the last few years. Is this the price of innovation or a misstep in managing technological transformation? Mel, what's your take on Microsoft's approach?
So I think we can approach this sort of in several different ways. There's just like kind of the strategic look of it. Like, people have to rebalance their workforces to align with AI delivery and also their internal use of AI tools. So this requires like different developer and data skill sets. And so in a way, they are making their workforce more efficient. And if you look at, sort of companies that sell AI for workforce efficiency, a layoff of their own staff is actually not such a bad thing, because it sort of offers like this subtle proof point that they can achieve the productivity gains that they're actually marketing. That's not to say that they won't be rehiring in other places. So I think, there's a lot of new jobs and reprioritization of resources because of AI. So, you're going to look at like things, from like our Jason Anderson, who's our DevOps analyst. He was talking about like methods like Scrum and other agile approaches, that these can be really streamlined through AI tooling. And so if you have less like effort on reporting and data gathering, those types of reductions make sense, but you're also going to have to put more money into R&D. You're going to have to put more money into like internal processes and stuff. So I guess that we're going to see like some kind of restructuring. This isn't just a like Microsoft is forever going to reduce their workforce, but they're rebalancing. And I think this is, of course, they have to answer to shareholders, right? But in a way, this is also making a rebalance to make better products. And so for enterprise customers, this is also a good thing.
I think I'd agree with everything Melody said. I think there's two trends that have a real impact beyond Microsoft that are maybe hidden in the numbers. One is the death and dying of entry-level IT workers, IT developers. I think there's a trend right now, partially due to the macroeconomic situation, partly due to AI. It is really hard to get an entry-level developer IT role right now. And a lot of those roles are being eliminated. And I think Gen AI and efficiency has a big role to play there. And I think there are big questions being asked about, our entry level tech jobs dying. I mean, it's a real problem. The other thing that's happening, particularly at Microsoft, is you have senior developers making a high six-figure $1 million earnings. I mean, that's used to be top developers could including grants, stock grants could ask for those kind of numbers. And I think Gen AI is changing that as well. It's really tough to justify, high six-figure income if you're a senior developer now. So I think there's kind of a squeeze happening at the top and the bottom of the market, which doesn't bode well for workers, employees in general.
I'd love to get all of your opinion on this. Like, do you think that as we start to look at managing this digital workforce that not just Microsoft, but everybody is talking about, that there may be more of an opportunity at kind of that entry mid-level of what I look at as sort of a combination of an IT/HR role of like a digital workforce manager, what in the Microsoft Work Trend Index they called an agent boss. They say everybody could be an agent boss, but I think that's kind of a specialized tool. And we're now kind of seeing, like with ServiceNow, with Microsoft at Build this week, like they're these control towers or agent towers where these agents now have identities and KPIs, and somebody's going to have to manage that. This doesn't just work like magic. So do you see an opportunity where that could be a new position that doesn't take a brain surgeon? It could be
Well, I don't know about that. So Melody, by the way, your write-up on that was great. I like what you published in Forbes about that. I don't like that term frontier firm. It seems very dystopic to call that in the way they describe it, just so we can get that out in the public. This is the challenge. And actually, Microsoft had the research previously. I don't think it was in their work trend report, but it was something they talked about initially when they were first launching Copilot. I remember Jared talking about this a lot. They came to the conclusion that the people that were better with generative AI tools were actually more mature, more seasoned employees. And the thought process behind it was this, that as a more senior employee, maybe already managing people, I knew how to give clear, concise directions to those generative AI tools. I knew how to ask what the prompt was, what I needed, the outcome, and what do it. So to answer your question, I do think there's going to be agent management roles out there, but I don't think it's going to align to entry level ideas. You're still managing people, and you're managing a group of very literal workers. They're going to give you the output that you ask for. So I think the skill is going to become a little bit of orchestration and clarity of information and some higher level functional things that you see at mid management or above that people have experience managing people. So that's my take on it.
a slight balance of it probably requires some management skills, but also these kids coming out of college now, they're growing up on AI. Like, there's a generation that will have been using AI since high school, since maybe middle school, that probably know AI better than a lot of us do, so the kind of the learning curve for them is going to be less steep than for many people who maybe have management experience but don't really understand the AI quite as well.
So we're putting into the market a group of young adults that have no experience in managing or interacting with people in person, but they can totally align every chatbot they can run into as well. So it's a risk.
They speak robot and they understand.
It's a good point as well, too. You're right. There's more digitally native workforce entering. What you see towards the tail end of Gen Z, that is true.
Well, and it's funny when you look at like a lot of these models, this is coming out from many different vendors that they're starting to figure out that various models have what some companies are assigning personalities. Like if you look at like, if you want to get something out of something, like this model is better for this task, this model is better for this task. Even from an artistic standpoint, you want to use Firefly for this, or you want to use a very, different models. Like they're starting to sort of become like almost personified. And I think that these younger generations growing up on that are going to understand that a lot. It's going to be like more ingrained in them that they get that than somebody who's trying to understand that now and isn't used to kind of figuring that out.
Yeah, but businesses move a lot slower than market research shows. So, from that same methodology, the kids that are coming, into the workforce now have been on Google and Google platforms for significantly longer than they've ever been on Microsoft platforms. But that hasn't necessarily translated into, when they entered the workforce, this big shift towards Google as a platform taking over the business landscape. Because almost every kid, when they get Google Classroom, they get doc sheets, they get everything else like that. They spend, that's been going on for a decade, and that hasn't necessarily immediately translated into that shift business wise for shifting platforms or shifting methodologies or anything else like that, because Microsoft is still pretty dominant in that marketplace, despite the fact that you have a workforce that in many cases, the first time they deal with Microsoft is when they go to a business. Because in college, in high school, and I have kids who have been on Google since jump. And if I showed them an Excel spreadsheet, they would ask me, why does it look like that? Why does it do it like that? Everything else like that, because they're so used to utilizing Google as a platform. But that hasn't necessarily translated yet, because businesses move a lot slower when they deal with transitioning people, because not as many businesses invest in the actual kind of retraining and repurposing of folks inside of their organization. They look to lay off and then hire new, as opposed to going through that process. So then that adds in all these other additional layers of things. Will we start seeing more AI enabled folks? For sure. But they're not necessarily always going to be the ones making the decisions on the pathways forward and the money invested to actually convert over to a very big AI enabled, workforce and landscape. They might try to utilize it, but if it fails, they're going to convert right back to, we need bodies and we need people and we need everything else like that, if it's a big failure of utilizing AI way too early. And so it's going to be a push-pull, I think, for a few years, before that kind of balance tips to people in management and ownership positions actually making those decisions long-term for industry, to actually, enable these AI enhanced folks, if you will, from their previous experience, to start making the decisions about how they go forward with this.
So build on that, Derrick, that this gap in adoption, the Gen Zs and the digital natives, they're going to have their day. We'll be all gone by then, but they will have the day, and this won't even be a discussion at that point. But so to Evan's point about this gap in, ability to adapt as fast as the vendors want you to and to turn the ship around, I agree that there is a huge disruption, kind of maybe opportunity coming to this whole, this bigger SaaS story. And just to come back to Microsoft for a minute, don't forget, they charge a premium for AI, right? $25 a month. And just remember, the other vendors don't charge. Like Zoom doesn't charge anything. So if AI suddenly goes off a cliff and becomes an afterthought, it doesn't hurt the revenues of any of these other vendors because they're not charging for it. But Microsoft is. And if they have a problem with AI adoption, that revenue stream is not going to be strong. And remember that they recently acknowledged how Teams is not AI native, and they are running a risk that they may hit a wall with Teams not being able to adapt effectively enough to Google, which is AI native. I had a really impressive briefing with them about their contact center story at Enterprise Connect, and what I took away from that is that the buyers, this is contact center, mind you, but the buyers are more interested in the AI capabilities of the offering than the functional capabilities of it as a CX platform. And as those digital natives move up the chain and become the buyers, they're going to be AI first about everything. And that's the criteria they're going to make their buying decisions on. That day is going to come. And maybe to Evan's point, that may spell the end of the road for for SaaS as we know it. So we're definitely in this murky place where there's a real disconnect between what the market can adapt to and the generational shifts we're seeing and what the vendors are trying to shove down everybody's throat right now.
It's quite an elegant bookend for the beginning and the end of the call, bringing it back to the SaaS. You're a real pro, Jon. I guess, before we go, of course, we will discuss some of the events that are coming up for a very busy June. Kicking off, we have Infocom and Cisco live, both in the same week. Good luck with those red eyes, guys, for that one. We also have Customer Contact Week. We have Commsverse and Nice Interactions at the very start of July. If you see any of our lovely panelists at any of these events, please head over and say hi. And that's us finishing today's call. So a massive thank you to Mel, Derrick, Evan, Craig, Blair, and Jon for being here. Please give us a like and share on social media and LinkedIn, or if you have your own perspectives and insights, please comment and let us know. I've been Kieran Devlin of UC Today. Thanks for watching.